Hey, what's up? Hello, everyone. Welcome into Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt.
My name is Dyl. Join us for our 2024 Best Picture Revisiting series, where we are diving into all 10 Best Picture nominees. We're talking about their nominations, their snubs, and our overall thoughts with the films. And today, we're going to be welcoming in a guest, as we always do. And the film that we're talking about was the early frontrunner for Best Picture. And like every year, this early frontrunner eventually falls off the top, but still finds its way into the Best Picture race.
So I want to welcome in my buddy Manan. Manan and I met at TIFF a few years ago, and Manan's one of the biggest movie buffs that I know. And so when talking about Scorsese, when talking about one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, it's only fitting to bring in one of the biggest Scorsese fans that I know. So how are you doing today, Manan?
I'm doing great. How are you doing? How are you guys doing?
Pretty good, man. I'm excited to talk Killers of the Flower Moon. I'm going to let you know in advance, you might find this to be absolute heresy. This, if I were to rank the Best Picture nominees, I'll say it off the top, this would be my least favorite of them. But it's still a good movie. But for me, it's my number 10 ranked. I like the other movies more.
So the first time I saw Killers of the Flower Moon, I was really excited for it. It was one of my most anticipated of the year. I carved out a huge portion of my day to sit down for this 3.5 hour film. The buzz from Cannes was riveting. I love me some Leo. Scorsese's always great, and the trailers really hooked me as well. And I have to say, for viewers out there who may have saw Matt and I's initial review, I liked it a lot. Had some really big issues with the sound, which then caused me to have a lot of issues with the pacing, because when I couldn't hear the dialogue, it was like, oh yeah, I've been here for 3.5 hours. And then when I rewatched the film, I definitely liked it more. My issue currently with the Best Picture lineup is, I say this in every episode, we have a stacked lineup this year. All 10 films I think are great, and just because you get a 7 out of 10, that's what my number 10 is right now. It's not Killers of the Flower Moon. That's at an 8 out of 10 currently, but an 8 out of 10 in most years would be like top 3, top 4, and this year kind of has you in that 6 to 8, 6 to 9 range at the moment. So I'll go more into my thoughts about Killers of the Flower Moon here soon. But Manan, I guess we got to hear, where does this kind of stand up to your other Scorsese favorites?
Honestly, it's getting up there. I've become like more careful with like rankings and stuff, and I've like started like letting stuff like breathe in. Like, even though I do rankings on Letterboxd and all that, but I will say it's building up, and I think this is like kind of a masterwork. I know that word gets thrown around a lot, but I think like this is like especially this late stage of Scorsese is like, I don't know, it really feels, especially since Silence, I want to say, it really feels like these movies are being made by like a man who's lived a life. Like, they feel like reflections of his own career and life. Take Scorsese for granted, as in like, yeah, of course, totally. He's good at making movies, he's great at, but dude, this is like a 3.5 hour long movie about like a very extremely bleak subject matter, and like the way it moves, it's like insane. Like what him and like, I think like Thelma Schoonmaker especially, like the film flows, like it's paced very like sort of like meditatively, but it also has his like, you know, the usual stuff he's known for, but in a very different way.
You were saying before that, you know, the word masterwork gets thrown around a lot, but I think we can throw it around when we're talking about a master. You know, it's Martin Scorsese.
He's owned it.
We can call his films masterpieces because they are pieces by a master. So, you know, it works. But you're a man after Dylan's own heart, because Silence is Dylan's favorite Scorsese movie.
It is.
So
I think Silence again. I think I saw that when I was like 17. It hit me, but I didn't appreciate it the way. I saw it during the pandemic again, and like it like hit me like a truck. Like, back to like Killers of the Flower Moon. I think it is just like, it is bleak. Like, I think it is like, I know Scorsese is like known for like violent stuff, but I think like I just rewatched it this weekend again in preparation for this. Man, I think this is like the most like violent film I think he's made. I know like a lot of his other films, I think like like especially with something like Goodfellas, like the style is supposed to sort of seduce you into this like very like sort of fucked up world, because that's how the character is. But this film is different. Like this film is like, I think that it has like the more like, I don't flinch with like stuff anymore, because like we've just seen so many things, and there's like a particular death that happens in the film, and I flinched in the theater. I was like, wow, that's like, and it's just a wide shot. A lot of murders in the film which are just captured in wide.
I do think we should talk about Scorsese's direction specifically, the things that he's doing here that kind of make him that master at work. And alternately, I will also just kind of put forward some of the things that don't quite click for me during this, because obviously Scorsese's doing some amazing things with the pacing, like you were mentioning, the choice to stay wide in a lot of these shots. There's such mature choices, because Scorsese through his whole career has been really known for this sort of bubbling energy, and you don't get that energy here. You also didn't get it in Silence or in The Irishman. They're all very meditative films where it is the work of not someone who's tired, but someone who has lived a full life
and knows that they're nearing the end of their life. They feel
Yes.
very much like someone who knows what's about to come, and they're sort of like using the film to sort of talk about that. And
Yeah.
sorry
and The Irishman in that way is like, it's a bit of a letter to the genre that he has helped to create, helped to inspire. And in this film, it's another movie kind of like that, where he's talking about true crime, and he's talking about audiences' fascinations with death and murder and horrible occurrences, including this genocide that went on. Why is it that audiences seek to be shocked by material like this? All that stuff is really interesting, but there are a couple of things that hold me back a little bit on the movie. The main thing is, of course, how the Osage are kind of sidelined in this story. I do find that the first hour of the movie is very heavily focused on the Osage, and I really appreciate all of that. The balance between these dumbfuck criminals and the Osage is really strong there. But past that hour point, it really starts to laser focus in on the criminals themselves, on the white people in this story. And ultimately, this is part of Scorsese understanding who his audience is. He's understanding who he's making the film for, which is a largely white audience who were complicit and are continually complicit in crimes against indigenous people.
I do really appreciate Scorsese's direction in this film. I definitely think there's sometimes where maybe like what the conversation is going right now on social media in the public, should he be the one telling this story? Probably not, but I think the way he does go about it in his own way is pretty fair, is pretty appreciative, and careful is a word you could use. While I think there are times where the violence does come out, I think they're all used sporadically throughout. You talk about the pacing of how Marty movies are usually very energetic. This film is very methodical, but it does have those little instances where the energy comes out, where we see these acts of violence. I think about the montage of where various groups or various individuals in this community are being killed, and there's not really any lead into it. It's just boom, bold, in your face. You have to see these actions in front of you and have to understand nothing is being done about it, and it makes you think like, what's going on, what's wrong in this community. And then we see what is going wrong. It's King Hale, it's his minions, it's him going about rolling over this town, seeming like he's the good guy throughout. And I think Scorsese's way of going about that story angle, sure, it may not be the correct way in some people's eyes, but I think he's doing the best with what he's able to do. As we've seen throughout his career, he's always been more focused on telling the villain side and showcasing why these villains are wrong. This film could have easily been directed by another filmmaker who made King Hale seem kind of like anti-heroes, where like, oh yeah, they may have done something bad, but hey, they're still good at the end of the day. And I don't think this film takes that approach. I think the way Scorsese goes about it, where maybe it's some camera angles he has, maybe it's the way that some scenes are shot, paced throughout, are just very provocative, and for like a lack of terms, where I definitely think another filmmaker may not have been as careful with their approach here. And I think, without going into overt spoilers, because we'll say this for our screenplay thoughts, I think the way that Scorsese's direction leads us to the eventual conclusion with that final scene makes some of those earlier choices, where maybe they can kind of come across in the wrong way, seem like they're all very intentional at the end of the day with what this film is trying to say about, I guess, everything that's going on in it.
Look, at the end of the day, it is a piece of entertainment that is a $200 million movie starring movie stars, and of course, but I think, I know we're gonna save this later for the screenplay, I'm sure we'll mention this, but this film was supposed to be very different. It was supposed to
Yes.
be, so originally, so they were basing it off of the book, which was more so about the creation of the FBI, which came through as everyone started working on this case in the Osage Nation. But I think we are very lucky that someone like Scorsese still did it, because I think the film justifies it. I really do think so, because I think the main character, even though they do not have the most screen time, I do think the main character is Lily Gladstone's character, and I think she is the heart of the movie. Everything does revolve around her. Like, I think her presence, like, she commands the screen, like, every single scene. Yeah, and she's in scenes with like De Niro and like DiCaprio, and like she holds your attention. Like, they're all like looking up to her, and like wherever she looks, you look. And I really do think like there are some. I think because Scorsese really did work with everyone in the Osage Nation to really tell like this story truthfully as much as it could, even though yes, I do agree this is from like the perspective of like the murderers, and like he's done this again and again, and I think, but this is the only way he can tell the story about showing. And I think this is in theme with a lot of films this year, especially like The Zone of Interest and Oppenheimer.
Yes.
In a weird way, which are these films about like people sort of like coming to terms with like the mass sort of like acts of violence they've committed towards like other people / minorities. And there is one sequence that is, I think, my favorite like sort of 30-second in a film of any moment of last year, which is the moment where her mother passes away, and she is sort of like taken away to the afterlife by her ancestors, and that scene just took my breath away. And I think even though he is a white filmmaker, I think he really did sort of listen to people's stories and tried to tell them as truthfully as he could. But the main thing I sort of was not completely 100% sure about is the central relationship, which I'm sure, which a lot of people have spoken about, which for a long time you think like, does the film sort of have a handle on this? Like, does it sort of understand what it's trying to say, and like what's happening, which is this like it's a poisonous relationship, and by the end he's literally poisoning her, and she doesn't really say anything for a long time, even though especially during the later half when he sort of goes into she knows everything. She knows he was like responsible for murdering her own family, but I think that final sort of like, again, like that performance is just like that. Her just not saying anything in that final moment, just like, again, like is the shining example of like less is more.
Following up with Lily Gladstone, I mean, she is probably Killers of the Flower Moon's best chance to win an Oscar in the lead actress category. I think all the acclaim she's getting this season is very warranted. I think she is great, but if I had to give one little area of where like I wanted a little bit more, this seems to be a theme throughout our series, where there's one performance that's getting a bunch of acclaim where I'm like, I wish they had like one more scene to do something, because she is very good when she's on screen, but like you mentioned, she is kind of sidelined. She's not really able to do anything, really able to speak for 2/3 of this film. I think the screen time data came out where she's in like 33% of the film, which is that a lead? That's another question to be had. But I do think the decision to sideline her character for me, detracts from her awards chances, but it does echo and showcase how integral her performance, her character is to this overall plot. Because I do agree, the end of the film where Scorsese is the one reading out Molly's final will, final comments into that newspaper, is really echoing what the thesis of this film is, where maybe tragic things do happen in your life. Maybe you are ripped away from your family. Maybe murders do occur, but you don't let that derail you from who you want to be, for who you are, and how she still raises her family. We see at the end of the film with the Osage community coming together to play their song that did receive an Oscar nomination. I just think that ending with how it goes about that story is where I think Scorsese and team and company very much excel with what they're trying to do here, even if they may not be from the Osage community themselves. They're very much echoing and propelling the story that Molly herself went with, as well as the Osage community not letting this define who they are.
Mm-hmm. Lily Gladstone is definitely very good in the movie. She has a very commanding screen presence, but I do just echo what I was saying earlier with feeling like the Osage people in the story were sidelined, and that's kind of the point of her character. She is being poisoned. She's out of commission for the majority of the film, but it feels so disappointing to me that we're seeing her as this victim the entire time instead of seeing the strength of this woman. I don't know. Like, I don't know if I agree with what you said earlier, Manan, that she's the heart of the film. She's definitely who the film is about, but I feel like the way she disappears from the screen, the way she disappears from the story, the way that she's kind of reduced to Leonardo DiCaprio being like, my wife is sick, and we don't see her, we're just hearing him say, my wife is sick, over and over and over. It just feels like it ceases to be her story pretty quick. And that is a little bit disappointing for me. I just, to go back to the way that the story's framed, and to speak about what you were saying earlier as well about the central relationship and the complexity of that. And, you know, the question, does the movie land that complexity? I'd say it mostly does, because it brings to mind this idea of the contradictions of racism, the contradictions of hate, where someone who is horrifically racist is still absolutely convinced that he is in love with her, even though he is killing her, even though he's killing her family, even though he's killing her neighbors, everyone that she grew up with. He is systematically killing her race, and yet he insists in his own brain, I am still in love with her. And it almost brings to mind, does Ernest love Molly as a wife, or does he think of her almost as a pet? And that's a really interesting question that I think Scorsese is really bringing up here, is the dehumanization that needs to occur in instances of genocide, in instances of these terrible, horrific events happening. There is this dehumanization. I just wish, honestly, imagine if we saw the story flipped just a little bit from Molly's perspective, and we got that sense of, you know, not is he poisoning her, but seeing how she justifies in her mind that, you know, maybe he's not, or maybe he's not all bad, instead of seeing it from his perspective.
I guess I have a rebuttal for some things that you said there, but we'll save that for when we dive into DiCaprio's snub performance later. But another actor who did get nominated at the Oscars was Robert De Niro as King Hale. And I mean, he's collaborated with Scorsese so many times, and I may be as bold to say this is my favorite or second favorite performance after King of Comedy of their collaborations.
Whoa.
I just think his evil, dominating presence is so felt on both viewings. You fully understand why people follow his every word. It could be people like Ernest and his brother, or it could be people like the Osage community. You just see the magnetism and the charisma of his character ooze through the screen, and I just like feel like what De Niro is doing here is so special. It's something that we haven't seen from him in a long time, where he just has so much control on this character. And I know I just keep bringing back the weight and how he's ruling everything, But I feel like if you put someone else in this role who doesn't nail some of the line readings to show that he is caring, like when they're all sitting together discussing who's going to Washington, who's paying, he steps up and says, I will offer funds. I will double the reward money if y'all can find this. And he goes out of his way to show like, hey, I'm on your side, but secretly I'm not. I'm doing this so I can cover for myself. I just think a lot of what's going into the writing of this character as well as his performance is very rewarding. And again, stinks that supporting actor is so stacked this year, because I think in like most other years, this could be a possible another win for De Niro. Just how good this category is this year. He's maybe number 5 in the category.
He was the manifestation of evil. Like, he is just, he has no, like, the way he often casually just speaks about, oh, this guy's my best friend, and it cuts to like him like allowing that guy to get killed. And it is actually like, I think like the uncle like sort of like nephew relationship is like very, very fascinating. I know that sort of like takes up a lot of the film, sort of like this manipulation of Ernest.
Now, Manan, I do want to hear from you about the cinematography, because you are a cinematographer. You do this work. So I want to. What do you think about the cinematography in this? This is another one of the film's nominations, and it has that very classic film look to it. So I want to hear from you, like, what really stands out about this work?
The scope. I think this film, with the wides especially, I think this film is just capturing. It is, I do feel it's this very sort of like intimate epic in a way. It is so large. There are so many characters, and he's sort of like, and some of the shots are just, again, like there's a recurring shot with the owl, which is like a simple shot, but again, like for what it means in the film and what sort of it symbolizes. And especially there's like this sort of like shot where she's in the bed and she sort of like sees the owl come in, and which is like supposed to represent death and like and what's gonna come, and then sort of like she sort of visions that she's like, and then the door opens and Leonardo DiCaprio walks in. And I thought just that it's such a simple like sort of setup, and just but speaks volumes for like the themes of the film. And again, like there are like that final shot is just again like so amazing, like as it just like moves up. And again, and like I remember like when I first saw the film, I'm sure you guys must have thought this as well. There was just when the film opens, you know, there's for a split second, I don't know if you caught this, before sort of like the oil sort of burst, there's this like this effect, I don't know what
very
it
like
is,
flickering film.
Flickering film thing, which sort of, the moment I saw that I was like, oh, this is gonna be good. This is gonna be good. It was a beautiful movie. And again, like Rodrigo Prieto, who shot the film, shot Barbie as well, which is like so very talented.
Could you be more different between those two films?
Right? I know. And I believe he's been working with Scorsese since The Wolf of Wall Street.
Cinematography is, I mean, it's always a shining part of any Scorsese movie. The way that he interplays between light and shadow is always so interesting. You know, in film school, I studied art history for a little bit. It was very mandatory, but when we started talking about Caravaggio, the art history teacher, the professor started talking about how Scorsese imitates these specific images, the way that he uses light and shadow, and he does it so well in this movie. Now, there's not a lot of scenes where we really get that sort of darkness, that sort of chiaroscuro that comes into play so often in his films, but there are moments in there, and the way that he uses shadows to hide certain things, to pronounce people's faces, so well done. The thing that I always see as a mark of a really strong director is when their films kind of look the same across multiple different cinematographers. And his style has definitely evolved through the years, but there's still certain key things that you can see in every period of his career, no matter who his cinematographer is. It's the shadows, it's the way that light bounces off of tables, it's the wide shots and the use of negative space a lot of the time. There are moments in this that I'm reminded of that classic scene in Taxi Driver where it just like the camera floats to the empty hall. There's a lot of those types of moments in this film where it's just about the emptiness. It's about the lack of a subject in the frame. So I think the cinematography is very good. Now that said, it's not the prettiest film, which is, I would say, part of the point of it. It's not meant to be a gorgeous piece of work, because it is very bleak, and it's sort of intentionally not all the time like stunning to look at. It's beautiful images, but they're not beautiful in that conventional like, ooh, it's so pretty way. Like, you're not meant to look at this like they're photos in a scrapbook or something. It's really, every image is meant to say something, and it's all very purposeful how it comes together.
For me, I think the cinematography is good. I don't love it, kind of similar to you, Matt. I really do like how they shoot specific characters. Going back to De Niro's King Hale, I think there's multiple times where they shoot him like he's a preacher, like he's a prophet. There's the down low shots when he's talking to Gladstone's sister early on, where it looks like he's just preaching to her. And then there's other times throughout where we get those super wide shots that both of y'all have mentioned, like when the field's burning, where we can see little things, but we don't exactly know what little things are going on, and then how.
That's such a beautiful shot.
I also like the uses of like point of view cameras, where there's times Lily Gladstone's walking through right by the train, and you can see all the wolves looking at her when DiCaprio first walks into the room with all of King Hale's lawyers, where we kind of feel in their shoes for a little bit of a moment. Obviously, that's not something the film uses throughout very often, but are things when they are used are very eye-popping. But speaking of eye-popping, that leads us to two other craft nominations Killers of the Flower Moon got: production design and costume design, because the production design here I think is super grand. I mean, just finding these locations to shoot on, then building these sets on these locations, making them fit into the time periods, because to my understanding, most of this wasn't already there, kind of similar to Oppenheimer, where you have to recreate stuff from photos, and doing it so photorealistic, I think, is truly a feat. But in the costume work, obviously the Osage gowns that Lily Gladstone wears during her wedding and some other stuff that you see throughout the community is very eye-popping and very impressive. But going to something that you may not always notice is some of the men's outfits, where it could just be a simple cowboy hat, some boots, suits. I think it all just very immerses you into this time period, because obviously you see men in suits. Are we thinking the 40s? Are we thinking the 60s? Are we thinking the 80s? And I think this film does a very good job putting you into the time period of where you are currently at here. And then with the makeup and hairstyling, I also think this is pretty great. I think it's one that was very much slept on throughout the awards season, where people are like, oh yeah, the makeup on Bradley Cooper and Maestro, very noticeable. Willem Dafoe's face and Poor Things jumps off the page. But you don't really think about the makeup work here, and that could be on DiCaprio's teeth, the dirt on a lot of the white men throughout the community, as well as the oil that you talked about before on some of the Osage early on. I just think that all of these factors being put together just make this not eye-popping makeup work, but very good in that sense of like, it's so good that you don't even notice it.
Oh, dude, the attention to detail in this movie is so well done. You can feel the research that's gone in, especially in the costume design. I think it's just a stunning achievement in costume design, just the way that they went out of their way to make everything feel so authentic, so real to the time period, to the culture. Beautifully done. Yeah, it all looks great and feels real. It feels authentic. It doesn't feel like an imitation of something. It feels like it's the real deal, which is a really... It speaks to the care that Scorsese put into representing the Osage people correctly. And the production design, I mean, you said it all. They had to build the whole city from scratch, and that's always really impressive. And it's I mean, that's why it cost $200 million to make, I assume. That and Leonardo DiCaprio's salary, but yeah.
No, I was just gonna say that's what I mean. Like, I think like you see the budget though, that $200 million, like you see it on the screen. Like, you know, it is like the detail, and again, like recreating stuff like from scratch is no easy feat. Like it's a lot of work, and to make sure everything is like very authentic and to the time. And I'm sure there are some sort of like visual effects shots involved as well,
Yeah.
especially like the opening shot of like sort of DiCaprio pulling up to like William Hale's house. And but again, like it's really stunning work. And I think like because yeah, as you were saying, the makeup is like, it's so good you don't really notice it. And it's like I think it's like, yeah, you sort of like award seasons, like they always focus on like, oh, who put the most shit on their face, and sort of like ignore, sort of like when there are a lot of people in this film, like it's a huge, and like you sort of feel like this entire community, and it's a lot of people, and like everyone sort of like feels like they belong in that time, no one sort of feels like, they just walked in from 2024 or something. And I think that stuff gets taken for granted a lot. And I think production design is by Jack Fisk, I believe, who is like a legend. Like the guy's done like so many things. And like I think this is like a lot of like really people who've been doing this for a long time and are very good at this stuff coming together and sort of like making a film that sort of feels very, very sort of like something that would be made more so back in the day. Like it really does feel like, who else makes 3.5 hours movies anymore, and it is insane, like, that this film got a wide distribution, like, and it did sort of like make somewhat money. Even it made more money than I thought it would, actually. I thought this was gonna like tank, but it actually made, I think, like close to like 70 million in the US.
I mentioned makeup and hairstyling. That would be a personal snub to me, but a snub to some other people that I know Matt and I would agree on is best sound, which this film did not get, and that kind of goes hand in hand with song and score. The sound work here was always my issue with the film on both viewings. My initial viewing, I saw it in IMAX, and there were certain scenes that I could not
Couldn't
just
hear
hear the audio, or
I
it was super muffled throughout. But there was other times, especially with the score, where the score was so overpowering, which I really liked. Like that first boom of the oil, that score just hit super hard, and to me, like, oh, it's a creative choice. Stuff is kind of quiet until the Osage finds their gold, and then obviously we're back to normal audio, and like, oh no, that's just a sound mixing error. But for the score, I do like the score in this film. I know Matt will have his comments here in a second, but I think this is a score that works very well outside the film as well as inside the film. It's something that I always like to separate when talking about scores, because some of my favorite scores of all time don't always work in the films, and there's some scores that are the best scores of all time, but I would never listen to them on my own in like my headphones or my headset or anything like that. But I think the killer score here is perfectly fine in the film. I think it fits the groove at times. It keeps the pace going for a 3.5 hour film. There's some upbeat songs. There's also some darker songs throughout in the score tracks that very much fit whatever mood, whatever tone that you're supposed to be feeling in the moment. And I guess the last thing to hit on is the song that got nominated, which I love this nomination. I think I even told Matt during our initial review, like, I would love for this to get nominated. There's no way it would, but it would be such a cool nomination for one, what it stands for, and then two, its use in the film. And I think the song kind of hits too. I'll listen to it on my own time, and so I'm happy that one got in. But I am kind of glad sound did not make our Oscar 5.
Oh yeah, the sound design is oh god, it's at least it's not Ferrari. It's majorly.
I haven't seen.
Oh,
You're in luck.
well,
You're in luck.
I mean, seeing Ferrari's one
Michael
thing,
Mann?
hearing Ferrari is a whole
Really?
other thing. It's the sound design. It's terrible, Manan. Oh my god. Yeah, it makes Killers of the Flower Moon sound like great in comparison.
Gold.
But I will say with the score, I'm pretty mixed on the score. I do love Robbie Robertson. I'm a huge fan of the band, but at times I just feel like the sound of it, that sort of classic rocky vibe, it just feels so dated. I don't know. The score bothers me every time I've listened to it, every time I've seen the movie. It just feels out of place to me. That said, one thing I will give it credit for, I like the way that it interweaves some like different sounds that aren't typically expected in this sort of classic rock. There is this sort of indigenous influence in the music that I think is really cool, and I like that Robbie Robertson's using that. And I mean, also worth mentioning, Robbie Robertson is one of the only key creatives on the film who actually is Indigenous. So that's definitely a really cool point with this, and you can feel it in the music. The music just kind of bugs me at times, but the song, one of the coolest nominations we got this year for sure. So cool that got nominated. And yeah, the use with the camera just pulling up with the credits and everything, my god, that song's awesome.
Yeah, I can't wait to see the Oscars and see that song being followed up by like
Yeah.
Ryan Gosling singing I'm Just Kidding.
Yeah, I
Find
wonder
the
how they're going to do
juxtaposition.
that song at the Oscars.
Yeah,
like
I
I
am
really
curious
am
about
curious.
that.
My best guess would be is maybe they even invite out the people who perform it in the film, since the people who perform it in the film are current day Osage, and just have them come on stage. Honestly, you could just do a stack shot, or you could do like what the movie does, start in tight, slowly zoom out, and then eventually cut. But that would be my best guess, is you just bring in the current day Osage that performed in the film, just give them the stage, let them do their thing, and you just shoot it.
I just hope that they don't absolutely butcher the song in the way that they often do with the very interesting nominations that aren't from stars. Like, I think back to the Call Me By Your Name performance where it was like less than a minute, and they just like came up, sang a verse of the song, and then they were like, see ya, Sufjan Stevens, bye, get out of here. And so I do worry that they're going to be like, here's Billie Eilish performing this whole song, here's Ryan Gosling performing this whole song, we got to give 6 minutes to Diane Warren, and now we're gonna do half a minute of the Osage singing a song for my people, and then bye, get out of here.
The Oscars are always about editing stuff, trimming stuff down, cutting things out. One thing I appreciate about Kills of the Flower Moon is they didn't cut anything out. 3.5 hour movie, they just gave us all, and I think it works because in tandem with the score that we just talked about, I think it does kind of fly by. Obviously, my first viewing, I had the sound issues, but once I knew that coming in this time around, I never really felt the slog of the runtime, and I was always eagerly waiting at the edge of my seat, like what would unfold next. I mean, I knew the story, but like how exactly it comes with knowing what's coming next. Mentioned in some of the other series here that there's been performances I've wanted to see more from. There's been stories I feel like are cut too short, and I feel this is another example where I probably could have done an extra 20-30 minutes, got a little bit more of Lily Gladstone, got a little bit more with her family, especially with some of her sisters. They each get like kind of one scene to shine. Would like to see maybe an additional scene, or just maybe some more life before Ernest. I know that kind of cuts from the angle this film is taking, where the story starts with Ernest coming into the community and ends when Ernest is kicked out of the community. But I would like to see just one additional scene with Molly's family, how they function, how they get together, because we kind of get just broad caricatures of everyone who's not Molly, besides their one big moment to shine.
I'm curious what you feel about the editing, because obviously Thelma Schoonmaker has been with Scorsese since the beginning. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on the editing here. And also, if you have anything to add on the score, feel free.
And I think the editing like really lets everyone sort of like have a moment. I think so many people in this film specifically stand out to me. I want to say like a lot of the indigenous cast which was snubbed by the SAG Awards.
Yeah, unfortunately.
None of them were nominated, which is insane. I just want to mention
It's
SAG
rules.
Need a change.
It's
I
so-
swear.
Because we talked about last year with Triangle of Sadness, where like everyone's talking about this great ensemble when its only nominations have been like Harris Dickinson, Charlie Dean, and Woody Harrelson, and no one else would have been nominated.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with Killers, where it's just the big four and everyone else is kind of on the outside, even if they're very integral parts of the film.
Yeah, I want to mention Tantu Cardinal, Cara
Yeah.
Jade Myers, Janae Collins, Jillian Dion, who were William Ballou, who was so good in the film, I believe. And Tantanka means this guy. He was the native who was in the FBI, who was the sickest dude looked in 2023. He looked so cool, like genuinely, and Jason Isbell was actually like who is like a singer.
He's a great folk singer.
Yeah, and he's like, he kind of blew me away in this film. I was like, who's this guy? I've never seen him before. Like, he's just like, is this some like character actor dude? Like, and he was so good in the film. And I think like the editing again like lets a lot of these like people like actually have a moment. And like I remember a lot of like these characters as much, you know, as I do like the central ones, which is like saying something.
Yeah, Scorsese, his casting is always absolutely amazing.
On point.
You know, especially he's been casting musicians in the past few films.
Yeah.
If the Oscars had their casting award this year, Killers of the Flower Moon would be winning that.
Yep.
It is.
Yep.
It would be so deserving of a
It
casting
would be.
Oscar. The cast in this is amazing. Who they found for all these roles is perfect. It's,
Yeah.
you know, just it's an amazing, amazing cast, amazing ensemble. In terms of the editing, you know, the pace in this is so strong. Thelma Schoonmaker has such an innate sense of pacing, and I love the feeling of editing in Scorsese's movies because he does not care about continuity.
No.
He does not care
I
whatsoever.
love that about it.
But there's that pace that's just going and going and
Yeah.
going. And to me, I will say I don't think the movie needed to be 3.5 hours, but the way it was, the editing wasn't at fault for that. I
Yeah.
do think the screenplay could have been tighter. The screenplay could have been edited more, but the movie, you know, what Thelma Schoonmaker did was perfect for what she had. The screenplay, though, is definitely a little bloated, I would say. I understand the screenplay miss for the Oscar, the snub that happened there, because I don't know. It's like the dialogue's well written, but it just kind of goes on, and it could have definitely been tighter. But that said, this is the best version of the screenplay that has existed. I've read previous drafts that were more
yeah?
focused on the FBI, and yeah, it was bad, straight up bad.
I remember when you said that.
I struggled to actually even get through the screenplay that I read
Really?
like 2-3 years ago.
Eric Roth
Someone
wrote the
sent
first
me
draft?
Eric Roth. I read Eric Roth's draft. Scorsese was not on that draft. This
Yeah.
was just Eric Roth, and it primarily focused on Tom White, the Jesse Plemons
Yeah.
character. It was one of the worst scripts I've ever read. I'm going to be honest with
Really?
you. And a lot of the
Whoa.
stuff in it is still in this movie. But the thing that made it a really bad script is that the action descriptions were paragraphs long. They just went on and on and on. They weren't saying what was happening. They were just describing things. It was like reading a novel, but it was a screenplay.
And that's what I hear like the book is also about. Like it just contains a lot of just like chunky information, a lot of like it is basically about the creation of the FBI. So it's a lot of like I haven't read the book personally, but again I think Scorsese definitely his rewrite was what makes the film.
Or apparently Paul Thomas Anderson.
Yeah, I just heard that.
Maybe.
Wow.
Maybe. Allegedly, Paul Thomas Anderson.
I don't think so. Come on.
Yeah, I doubt it, because the script was definitely not written in Word.
It doesn't read like a Paul Thomas Anderson script either. But I guess to come to a little bit of a defense for the screenplay, I do agree that the screenplay kind of moves and moves and moves. I also like how it takes its time with telling the story. I definitely think this movie could have been told in 2 hours, but I like how it takes its time going deeper into some scenes where it's not just Leo talks with Lily Gladstone. Then he has to quickly go do this action for his uncle, and then do this other action, then comes back home, then other action, then wait, she's sick, what? FBI comes, and then oh, court case, oh, last conversation, boom, movie done, 2.5. Instead, it allows these interactions to happen throughout. We get to go deeper into some of those scenes. Manan, you mentioned earlier about Cara Jade Meyer's character's ultimate demise that we get to hear in the court scene. We make this movie smaller. That scene's cut out. It's quickly just mentioned here, and like a very short like closing argument in like a court scene, and then boom, we move on. And I like how this script, kind of going back to what we talked about at the very beginning of this, of how it's using its subtle burst of energy, especially in some of those more brutality type scenes. I think with a more chopped up screenplay, these scenes would not be given to breathe, and then it would simply just be we hear about these actions, and of course no one wants to see these actions, but without seeing this negativity, this brutality, this this horror happen, you wouldn't grasp how much of a tragedy this was, because we see it point blank. You get to really take in like, this is tragic, this is a travesty, we have to fix something, and obviously that's not what the movie's about. And I think that's where to some of the differences in the script come from. Not saying that's your difference, Matt, but other people I've seen online's differences come with it. Another thing I do appreciate about this script overall is kind of how it handles some of the characters. I know we talked earlier about DiCaprio and Gladstone's possible characters' love, and I know I've been on the outside looking in a lot of times in our Discord chats where I kind of had read both times that DiCaprio doesn't fully understand what he's doing. I think partially is because he's dumb, and the other part is he's just so naive. He thinks he's doing the right thing, but then eventually, like you mentioned before, Manan, when he tries it himself, from that point on, you can kind of see there's a different little energy to his character when he's around his wife. And
he knows.
At that point, he fully knows what's going on. But on this rewatch, I specifically tried to pay attention to how does King Hale, how does the doctors talk to him about the insulin, and they never despicably say it's going to kill her, it's going to harm her. They just say it's going to slow her down. And big brain Ernest, I honestly don't think he understands what slow her down means, because he seems very concerned with his wife of why she's sick. He doesn't really understand. He's so adamant about taking this, and thinks, at least at first, maybe there's a point before where, I've only seen this film twice, maybe there's another point before where he does realize, but on both viewings, I think he's honestly trying to do the right thing, but his angle of wanting to please his uncle does creep into where some of these more evil elements. I'm not saying Ernest was a good person, but I don't think it's as cut and dry as he knows what he's doing the whole time, and he's just playing for Gladstone. I think there is a little bit more of a fine line, which I think is one of this script's positives. I do agree, though, it does kind of feel long at times. This stuff that definitely could be chopped, definitely could be reworked. I would not have it in my personal lineup, but I understand why some people would. And I guess the last point here, just to talk about in terms of snubs, y'all have mentioned it before of Leonardo DiCaprio. And the whole talk coming into this movie out of Cannes was how this is his best performance of his career. We've never seen Leo like this before. Whoa, it's so different. And honestly, I don't really know another time we've seen Leo play a character to this level.
This dumb.
Yeah, like we've always seen Leo, even when he's the villain, he's at least got charisma to him. He's at least got the DiCaprio swagger to him, like in Django. But here, maybe it's the teeth, maybe it's that he looks a little heavier, the ugly hair, his unintelligent actions throughout, but I think DiCaprio really sells Ernest's idiocracy very well, and I think easily you put someone else in this role and they kind of make it more comedic than what DiCaprio's take is here. Like, I never read DiCaprio or Ernest as a joke character. I always take his actions seriously, but I understand that, hey, all the screws may not be there. Maybe that's just the person he is. Maybe that's from his time at war. Obviously, he was never on the front line, but war can still mess people up in their own certain ways. And like I said before, I do think there's a discussion to be had about his intentions with Molly throughout. But I bought kind of with our Anatomy of a Fall conversation where I can see both sides. I don't think it's cut and dry. Sandra was innocent. Sandra is guilty. Here, DiCaprio, I don't think it's cut and dry. He knows what he's doing 100% of the time, and he's oblivious 100% of the time.
I'll respond to that quickly. First by saying, now that I think about it more and more, yes, this movie could have been 2 hours, but it is absolutely a power move that Scorsese's like the last person in Hollywood who could make a 3.5 hour long movie like this. And no, the film doesn't need 3.5 hours, but he can, so he will. And I appreciate that, and I respect that. So to that point, my criticism of it being too long is kind of null, because it's Scorsese. You got to let him make the movie as long as he wants to, because he's the only person that can. And I guess to the point that you're saying there, Dylan, about does Leo know, I think that's honestly part of my problem with the movie, is that if you're excusing he doesn't know, then it feels like he's not responsible for those actions, and then it feels like it kind of lets him off the hook. And that is a problem that I have overall with the film, is that it's too kind to Ernest. It makes him stupid, but that idiocy, that, again, puppy dog-esque nature to that character where, you know, you're kind of questioning, is he smart enough really to do all this stuff? Does he really know what he's doing?
Again, I think like when you just accept what sort of like the movie is, I think it is this like amazing sort of like dissection on like the normality of like how like evil actions are carried out, and how perpetrators usually never sort of face actions, and again, like it is in a way important to show what happened, because I think that is what history is. You should, and it's a way of like making sure, even though it is from like the perpetrator's perspective mostly, it is still, I think, like this very sort of, I think the like that's where like the uncle, that sort of like whole thing, Ernest being like, you know, complicit, these guys just killing everyone, sort of could have been a very one note thing, and if it wasn't for sort of like their relationship, which is like and I think like De Niro and like DiCaprio's performances, like it's such a twisted relationship, and like especially the scene where he spanks him is like it's like whoa. It's a very deeply, I think, of, it's a pretty much, it's a way of like indoctrination in a way, because he's just like feeding him these things, which is like, this is our land, and like we have to do whatever, we have to take back our country and all of that like sort of like shit, and he's just feeding, and like Ernest is like just somewhere in the middle. I think like the first sort of like few scenes kind of establish him, like just he says he likes women and he likes money, and like he sort of like goes after that, and I don't think he's just one of those guys who sort of like just stumbles through life and sort of like wherever the opportunity calls, and he just like again just got himself so deep into this shit, and was also, and according like the way at least the film portrayed it, I do think he did genuinely love her. But it was just, he just did not want to face the reality of what he had already done.
I'm looking at our timestamp here. We're about an hour and a half into this recording, and just like Hills of the Flower Moon, it neglects to mention Brendan Fraser for the whole time, and I think that we should do that here as well. He doesn't show up until like 2.5 hours in that movie, and he leaves just as soon as he showed up. But hopefully we won't be calling you, and the viewers won't be calling you a dumb boy, because it's time to hear your preferential ballot. So this is the time where people could come at you, but we love to always hear our guests' ranking of the best picture nominees. So what is your number 10?
Yeah, my number 10 is Maestro. Yeah. I really did not like that movie.
Poor Snoopy.
And I was surprised by how much I didn't like it. I think it's a movie that tries so fucking hard to announce like its self-importance and its worth, and I think it is so hollow. Number 9 is American Fiction, which I really did not. I actually saw the final TIFF screening, the People's Choice screening, and I tried to get in the screening a couple of days earlier, but it was just like getting sold out very quickly. It was getting a lot of buzz. I watched it, I was like, what? I was just, my problem with the film was just like, it just sort of becomes what it's trying to satirize, and just like it just gets stuck in this loop, and I was just like, I just don't find anything, like I just forgot about it. Like that's how I felt. Like the minute like we sort of, I ran into Arnaud like afterwards, like, and like I believe like he had also seen it. I was like, yeah, that was not good. And we were both worried at the time that this might pull like a Green Book or something and win Best Picture, but
Still
thank
could.
God I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think Oppie's got that locked.
I probably would agree.
And then I can put Barbie there. I really good movie. Enjoy the shit out of it. Ryan Gosling, perfect. Like just, it was hilarious. It was really good. Then I would definitely put The Holdovers. I think this is like lower than I know most people would think. I really I really like it. I think it's like a very nice, like sort of like really warm, cozy slice of life. You really like the characters kind of movie. Was I was just like, yeah, I've seen it. It was like reminded me of a lot of like, I don't know, like Hal Ashby movies from like the 70s, which was, it was like had like the similar feel of like, yeah, like nothing. The last detail is like the movie I thought about the most, which was like, oh, you like come across these people and like they'll sort of like affect your life, but like nothing will kind of change, like it's just like for this moment kind of thing. It was nice, it was sweet. Didn't love it though. I thought it was just like, yeah, it was good. And I still love this film. Like again, a really fucking good year. Anatomy of a Fall I'll put at number 6. So good. Sandra Hüller is just, wow, like that performance is just like amazing, amazing, amazing. Poor Things, again, a film that was in my top 10. I think this is like Yorgos's like most like accessible movie. This is actually like this movie's made actually good money. Like
It
which
has.
is really
Got to
which is
100 worldwide.
yeah, which is insane. I think he finally found a way to sort of like realize that he's not going to change. The best he can do is like sort of like make something that sort of like matches his like most mainstream like him, which is still pretty fucked up like but I am
It's
actually
a Frankenstein baby
Yeah.
sex movie.
sex movie and yeah, I'm actually really surprised it's doing so well. And I think again Emma Stone is just phenomenal in that film. Phenomenal. I think it's like a performance of a lifetime. I want to mention, I know like I love Mark Ruffalo in this film, but I want to mention, I think the secret heart of the movie is Willem Dafoe. I think he's so good in this movie. I think he is so good. Like he's actually like, he is kind of like his like sort of what happens with this character at this end sort of like completes this whole like sort of like brings in this like element of like all of these life things she's experiencing, and with that of course like the death, this thing. And I thought like he was so good in the movie. So I'm actually like this thing just, so I'll go with Killers number 4. It actually was in my number 3 spot, but I just saw something like last month which has been like, I've been thinking about it a lot. And
Wonder what that could be.
yeah, like it's actually, I kind of find myself thinking about it like every day, and it might move up slowly, and it's called The Zone of Interest. But I've not actually had like a proper discussion about this movie, and man, do I have so many things to say. This movie is just, I know Matt, you caught it back in TIFF,
Yeah.
and yeah, this was a I think, and I think before going into the movie, I heard so many of those, like, you know, of course you're gonna hear those like, oh, watching a movie about Nazis, like Nazis are your main characters. And yeah, the movie is like it's brutal. Like you are forced to sit there and watch this family like live a fucking life while people are literally like, a genocide is happening literally across the wall. For a lot of people who think like, oh, why are we watching a movie from this perspective, I think something happens in the last 10 minutes which dropped my jaw. Like I know you guys know what I'm talking about, like the cut when it cuts to a different time, and my jaw was on the floor. I was like, oh, this is, oh. And like, and especially when how it happens, it's like the guy, like the father, like the husband, like sort of like looks through like at the camera through the shadows, and this thing about, and the movie become like, I thought this was just like so it basically becomes about like, you know, as this again which we were talking about with Killers, this thing about history will not forget you, history will remember you, and you will always be remembered because and thought that like the Glazer's direction in this movie was fucking phenomenal. I think this is like one of the best movies I've. Past Lives is my number 2. Past Lives, again, like I think Matt, you weren't like a big fan of it, or am I wrong?
It changed 24 hours ago.
I rewatched it
oh,
last night,
oh,
and it
oh.
moved up my ranking.
Oh.
It's one of my favorite movies of the past year. And actually, I wanted to ask you about Past Lives. Obviously, you love the film,
Yeah.
but it speaks so much to the experience of like being an immigrant as well. And
Yeah.
I mean, you're originally from India and
Yeah.
now live in Canada. And does that sort of touch you about the film? The way that
100%.
it talks about leaving a place behind, leaving a life behind.
Yeah, I think with the film, and especially watching a lot of interviews with Celine Song, it's very much she spoke about this thing which I relate to a lot, which is like once you leave home, you no longer ever feel like you can ever go back, and where you are is like also somewhere you don't exactly belong because you're not from here originally. And there's this, and that's what I feel like the film is about. Like I think it is, I don't think it's like a love, I think anyone who thinks like this film is a love story is like just missing the point, because I know a lot of like people are like, oh, but he should have like they should have ended up together and stuff like that, and like you're missing
It's
the
not the
point.
point.
It's That's not the point. The point is about like, it's about identity, and it's about it's about, and she just uses these relationships as like one is literally the past and one is the present, like the husband is the present, and
Yeah.
and she's in the middle. And I think that that sort of the central sequence in like the restaurant is like one of the most like wow, like this is like a fucking scene, like when you just know like someone wrote the shit out of a scene, you just know, oh wow, this is like such a good scene. And there's like a moment where she just like looks at the camera, and it was just such a small thing. And I remember, and she said in an interview that actually happened, like that she went to a restaurant with her like old like high school like sort of sweetheart from like South Korea, and her husband, and like she felt something in that moment where she realized, oh, the only way I can ever sort of like describe how I felt is like I need to make a movie about it.
You talk about Past Lives getting kind of shafted out of all these nominations, but your favorite film in your preferential ballots, the film that got all the nominations, Oppenheimer.
It's gonna
number
win.
one. Why do you love Oppenheimer?
Why I love Oppenheimer?
Because I do too.
Yep, it's because this is, I don't know, man. This is like Nolan is like, it's like he's just flexing now. He's just like, I am very good at this, and I think this is like he has like finally sort of like found like he often like, I know he has like he made like like everyone, we all sort of like started loving Nolan when we were like very young because of all of his sci-fi shit. But I feel like now he's sort of like, he has like a much more like strong grasp of like who he is as a filmmaker and like the kind of stories he can, and like and this story especially benefits because of those, because he learned this like sort of like large scale experiential thing, and now he sort of brings it to this very intimate thing. That's why I love this film, because like it is a very intimate story, and like at the end of it, but it is like told in this very like grand scale. Like the cinematography and like the scope is just insane. And I think what I love the most about it is like about these like, again, like these moral like conundrums, which is just like just one man slowly figuring out in real time like he kind of destroyed the world. and like, and it's just, and like again, like it's just, I think it's just about like how like small and like just fragile like men's egos are. That's what I feel like the whole movie's about, especially like Louis Strauss's perspective, which is like this guy who's just like obsessed with like what these guys like were talking about, and like just thinking the whole time that it was about him, not realizing that they were talking about much more important things. Nolan is like again killer with his endings. Like he knows how to end a fucking movie. And that, again, that ending of like just these two geniuses like just realizing that like they are like eventually they are geniuses, yeah, it is everything, but at the end of the day they were just like literally puppets who will be like just shoved to the side, and they will eventually be like everyone will spit on them, and then in 20 years everyone will like they will feed you potato salad and give you medals. And and like that's how it happens.
That's going to bring us to the conclusion of this episode revisiting Killers of the Flower Moon. As always, if you're new here, you made it this far in the video. We did not make it to the whole length of the movie, but we got pretty close. Consider dropping a like, commenting down below your thoughts about Killers of the Flower Moon, and consider subscribing for our next episode, which we'll be diving into Poor Things. But until then, my name's Dyl.
My name's Matt, and I want to thank Manan for coming on to talk about Killers of the Flower Moon.
Thank you, guys.
I really appreciate having you here.
Of course.
And as always, of course, this is Fantasy Filmball.